Welcome to Food Science, a cooking series where we'll take a look at easy recipes to make at home, with the occasional scientific facts sprinkled in to help you understand what you're doing and why. My name is Matt, I'm a chemist, an avid home cook, and I'd like to teach you how to make easy homemade sandwich bread. If you want fresh bread for breakfast, you have to get up pretty early. So let's get some caffeine and get going. Lots of people tried and failed to bake sourdough bread last year and have become frustrated with the time and effort that it takes. That is why today we are baking easy sandwich bread that doesn't take 3 weeks to make but more like 3 hours. First, let's talk about ingredients. For a basic bread, you only need very little: flour, water, yeast, and salt. For a nice and fluffy sandwich bread, we additionally need milk, butter, or some other fat, and sugar. But the most important ingredient is very hard to come by for most people. The single most important ingredient for baking bread is time, more specifically patience. To make our dough, we combine each 150 ml or 5 fluid ounces of milk and water, which should have a temperature around 35 degrees Celsius or 95 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the optimum temperature for our yeast. Speaking of yeast, that's what we're adding next. You can use active dry yeast or a fresh piece like I have here. Just read the instructions on the packaging on how much you need for 500 grams or 1.1 pounds of flour. Crumble the yeast into the milk mixture and let it sit for about 50 minutes till it starts to foam. This is also our indicator to see if the yeast is still alive and active. And I say alive because it is. Yeast is a type of microorganism that we've used for baking and brewing for thousands of years. The important thing is not to call it bacteria, because those are in a different class of microorganisms altogether. While our yeast blooms, we add our 500 grams or 1.1 pounds of flour, 30 grams or 1 ounce of sugar, and 12 grams or 0.4 ounces of salt into our mixing bowl. And yes, all instructions are mass quantities, no cups and spoons here. It is so much easier to recreate a recipe and have it turn out good if you weigh your ingredients. So please invest in a set of kitchen scales. It's a real lifesaver. For mixing, you can use any large enough bowl, but today we're going to use a stand mixer. Mix it together so our yeast doesn't get hit with a pile of salt right in the beginning, which could kill it and therefore stop our bread from rising and getting nice and fluffy. Now pour in the yeast milk mixture. Attach the bowl to the stand mixer and the stand mixer to the dough hook. Let the mixture knead for 3 to 4 minutes till the dough comes together. If it's too dry and clumpy, you can add spoonfuls of water one at a time till the dough is smooth. We want some strength before we add our butter, so the dough doesn't get too wet. Add 40 grams or about 1.5 ounces of melted butter, a little bit at a time, and let it incorporate into the dough till it again becomes smooth and doesn't stick to the sides of the bowl. If you want to do this by hand, because you don't have a stand mixer, I advise you not to use melted butter but rather room temperature one. This will make it much less messy to incorporate by hand. After we've used up all our butter, we let the dough knead for an additional 5 to 6 minutes to strengthen our gluten network. And yes, we're going to talk more about gluten and what it does in future episodes. Our finished dough should be soft but spring back if poked. Roll it into a firm ball, place it back into the bowl. It now needs to rise at a warm place for about 1 to 1.5 hours until it doubles its size. And by doubling size, I mean doubling in diameter, not in volume, because a lot of other cooks use this term without explaining what it means. If you're unsure your dough has risen enough, just give it a few more minutes. You could cover your bowl with plastic wrap or aluminum foil, but I prefer a less wasteful option: a proofing box. This one I got for only a few bucks at IKEA. In the meantime, we can prep our oven, and no, you don't have to modify it in any way. What bread needs, especially within the first minute of baking, is steam. A lot of steam. The easiest way to achieve this is to pour some water into the bottom of your oven right after putting in your bread, but I strongly advise against doing that. because the risk of getting burned from hot water and steam is far too great. What I use is an almost closed container with a very high surface area and heat capacity inside to vaporize the water almost instantly. The cheapest way to build such a vaporizer is with an aluminium baking dish filled with coarse sand. To minimize splattering, cover it with a few sheets of aluminium foil and poke some small holes into it to let the steam escape and one bigger hole to pour the water into. Now simply place the dish on the bottom of your oven before preheating. When our dough is doubled, we need to shape it into our desired form. For sandwich bread, we need a 40 by 10 centimeters or 12 by 4 inches loaf pan. To shape the dough, first punch it down, take it out of the bowl and onto a lightly oiled surface, like a large cutting board, or you can do it directly on the table if you like. Using a rolling pin, we roll the dough out until it is the same width as our loaf pan's length. The thickness should be about 1.5 centimeters or about half an inch. It should be roughly in shape of a rectangle. This makes it easier to roll up and results in a more uniform loaf. If the dough resists and springs back, just let it sit for a few minutes and then continue shaping it. And now we have a more or less uniform rectangle. We start at one end, roll it into a cylinder, pinching it down as we go. This seals one layer to the next so we don't get large bubbles trapped in our bread. Also, pinch on the sides to get nice round edges. If you're happy with the shape, plop it into your lightly greased loaf pan, make some last adjustments to the position and shape. Now our dough needs to rise a second time for about 1 hour or, again, doubled in size. The rise comes from CO2, produced by the digestion of the sugar and starch inside the yeast cells. The CO2 is gaseous and forms tiny bubbles inside the dough, held in place by the gluten structure. Without structure, the gas would just bubble to the top and escape, and that's not what we want. After the second rise, we can finally bake our bread. Our oven should be preheated at least for half an hour at 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit with a vaporizer inside. Best you turn it on right after you've finished rolling the dough and setting it into the proofing box to rise. To bake, we take our loaf out of the box and score it lengthwise with a very sharp knife, a scalpel like I have here, or even a single razor blade. Now keep a glug of water at the ready and place your loaf pan into the preheated oven on the middle rack. And please wear oven gloves for safety. Quickly pour the water into the vaporizer and immediately close the door. Ooh, steamy. Anyways, now turn the oven down to 180 Celsius or 350 Fahrenheit respectively. After about 25 to 30 minutes, take out your beautiful loaf, remove it from the loaf pan ASAP so it doesn't steam, set it on a wire rack, brush it down with olive oil or melted butter to prevent cracking, and let it cool down for at least 2 hours. For me, it was a little more than a day of cool down time, but still, if you cut into it, we see how soft yet springy it is. If you look closely, you can see the spiral of bubbles we formed by rolling our dough. If we take an even closer look through the microscope, we see how much air, or more precisely CO2, is trapped in the bread. It almost consists of nothing but bubbles held together by strings of dough. Now, what do we do with nice sandwich bread? We make a sandwich, of course, so let's make a quick BLT. Crispy homemade bacon. Toast your bread with butter in the pan, and believe me, it's way better than throwing it into the toaster. Let's assemble. Mayo, a bit of mustard, of course a crispy bacon, lettuce, tomato, seasoned with a pinch of salt and freshly ground pepper. And this makes a damn good sandwich. People tend to overcomplicate and fancify things, but simpler is oftentimes equal, if not better. I hope you've enjoyed the video and learned something. If you want me to cook specific recipes in the future, leave a comment down below. Please subscribe, share and like to your heart's content. And with this, I leave you by saying, keep cooking, keep learning, and thanks so much for watching.